So I'd like to welcome everyone back from break. We're gonna be closing out the conference today with some really excellent presentations. And just as a reminder for anyone who's looking to come and join us for social later, we'll be over at the old lumber company, on the roof of the old lumber company for social engagement after the conference. So please feel free to come in and join us. But let us get ourselves started with our first presentation and enjoy.
Hi everyone, my name is Savita. I am an undergraduate here and my major is computer science. So I'm pretty sure like most of you haven't heard about the topic that I was talking about today, mostly because it is not prevalent in this part of the world, but it is like highly prevalent in the part that I come from, that would be a country that is dominantly Hindu and is something I would say old traditions and values related to it. So the word you see here is known as Tsonkoli Pratha, among which the Pratha word is actually a tradition. So it's a tradition regarding to Tsonkoli. As I get started, so this tradition that I'm talking about is prevalent mostly in the western region of Nepal. That is where I'm originally from as well. So the word Tsonkoli, when you break it down into two parts, the first part is actually menstruating women. So it's a taboo against menstruating women that is practiced mostly and like highly by a lot of people in the far western part of my country. And the Padi part actually is for women. So it's actually if you loosely converted from Nepali terms to English, it would actually be a menstruating women. So it's a tradition related to menstruating women. And in this tradition, I would say, a lot of women who are targeted by this tradition are, as it says, menstruating women, as well as women who've been involved in childbirth. So immediately after childbirth and immediately when you're having your period, you are not allowed to live in your home. So that is the main gist of the entire tradition that I'll be talking about. So where does this tradition actually come from? So in Hindu religion, we have actually a total of around 33 deities of God and about more than 1,000 different gods as well. So among the different deities, we have a deity known as Indra. So he was very angry because he was the one who was cursed because he was responsible for killing a lot of, as you all know, we have a Hindu caste system. So among the Hindu caste system, the foremost caste system was the Brahmins. So he was responsible for killing Brahmins. So as a result of this, he was cursed, and this curse was actually given to women in the form of menstruation. That is what we believe in that part of the world. And in this belief, it is thought that if a menstruating woman touches a tree, then the tree will bear no fruit. So she's not allowed to touch the tree. It is also believed that if she consumes milk, then the cow would actually not be able to give any more milk. If she reads a book, then the goddess of education will actually not allow her to read anymore. And if she touches a man, the man is supposed to get ill, and she herself would be considered infertile and will not be able to give birth to a child anymore. And her bones will be brittle, and she is expected to suffer from long-term chronic diseases. So this is the belief of the people who are practicing this tradition. And so who actually is affected? During this, a woman is expected to spend around 13 days in a shed. So when I say shed, it is not a regular small home. It is something that is shared with a cattle, like a cow or goat. So the sanitary condition is not that good. And in some cases, the places that you're staying at, it is specially designed for those purposes. And in those instances, you do not have a bed, you do not have any kind of bathroom accessible to you, and you do not share your meals with the family members that you have in your house. And during this period, a woman is expected to spend at least 13 days in the shed during her first and second period. But during the third period, she is forced to live in the shed for 7 days. And for lifelong after that, she is expected to live once a month in the shed for 4 days at a minimum. Similarly, a woman who's given birth is expected to live in the shed for 11 days immediately after childbirth, with a along with the child. And in these conditions too, there are no bedding or lodging available for the woman, and she is in most cases expected to sleep on haystack. And in these references as well, a woman is not to be touched by other people, otherwise they will be the ones who would suffer the wrath of God. So this is the main population that is affected by it. So where are actually women supposed to go during this time? Like I said, they are supposed to live in a shed. These sheds are also known as both. Like the first word would be chokoli, that means menstruating women. So the second is both, that means a shed designed specifically for menstruating women. And they are usually shared with the livestock, like cows and swine, and they do not have any forms of doors or locks on it. And they are like, since they do not have facilities of bathroom, what is expected of them is to dig up the ground for defecation and urination, so do not really have any hygiene practices as well. So this is the main place where a woman is expected to live. So during this time, what exactly is expected from a woman? So menstruating women cannot drink water from the local community where they give water, because if she touches the community well, then it is expected that she is actually going to, I would say she would be making the community well impure, and then hence the entire village would suffer from different kinds of diseases as well. Similarly, we do not have any bed, we do not have any blanket, and result of which, like like the defecation is supposed to be done in the open. And during this time, we cannot leave the boat. So the main thing is during the seclusion period, if you leave the boat, then anyone who comes in contact with you is either die or suffer very badly. So even in these instances, if you get sick, then until your seclusion period is over, you are still not expected to get out. In many instances, many people also die because of all of these traditions that have been held there. And though this is a very backward tradition, and it was first addressed by the interim constitution of Nepal in 2017, I think 3 years after it, a total of 28 incidents were reported due to this tradition, among which 9 incidents were actually related to death. In the recent years, in 2018, a woman died due to smoke suffocation because the boat did not have any facilities for heat, and since the temperature is expected to drop below 0°C, she actually had set up a fire for herself, and due to the suffocation caused by the smoke of it, she died. And similarly, in many instances, women are also killed by a lot of wild animals because it is usually in a forest kind of area, like in a remote area. So people actually die because of various kinds of diseases, and even in instances, there are a lot of different men passing by the villages, and many women are subjected to rape as well. And because rape is another taboo, many of these incidents go unreported as well. In 2010, a girl, she was an 11-year-old girl, was asked to live in a totally in a boat because she was having a menstruation. During this period, she suffered from diarrhea and dehydration and asked for help from her family members as well as her neighbors. But since she was considered impure and the people who didn't want to touch her because they would ultimately injure her, she ultimately died. And in Nepal, a lot of regions that practice this tradition, women have high nutrient like prolapse in women, that is the urinary bladder will actually become non-functional at that point. And due to this reason, since child are also subjected to live with the mother immediately after childbirth, that is up to 11 days, due to the cold temperatures within the tubes, they suffer from pneumonia and diarrhea and eventually die. So the infant mortality rate is also very much high in these regions. So what is the situation of this tradition in Nepal right now? So this tradition was supposed to have been eradicated by 2007 AD because it was included in the interim constitution of constitution of Nepal. But this is not actually possible because as a recent survey was conducted, and it was conducted with 122 different women. Among them, 72% practiced exile or chopping in one form or the other, and among them, like among the surveyed women, 28%, though they lived in home, they still experienced some form of taboos and stigmas related to poverty. And of the half of the people who were actually experienced exile, as interesting as well. So this is what is happening in most parts of the world.
But we'll be doing questions right after. Okay. All right. So, Kritika, are you all set? And I apologize if I butchered your name.
No, you're fine. You said it right. Okay, should I start sharing my screen?
Yes, anytime.
Oh, well, let me see here.
At least I should have that setting in place. Perfect.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Kritika Kurala, and today my topic is about cross-culture abuse relationship that happen in India. And the reason I chose India is because I'm from Nepal, and India is our neighborhood country, so I want to learn more about India. And I'm gonna talk about the India itself. So India is located in South Asia, which is the second largest population and seventh largest country, with 28 states and with 22 languages. They declared independence on 1947. And this is a map of India with their state and the languages they talked about. An overview, I'll be talking about the issue region, why it's happening in India, and the possible solution and alternatives, how we can prevent this from happening, and the conclusion. So first of all, I'm gonna talk about the partner from same country but different religion. So it's basically the people from India, but they married to the different religion people. And I have a flag of Pakistan and India because India, they practice Hinduism, and Pakistan, they practice um, Muslim, and there's a conflict between Hindu and Muslim. There's separation on 1947 because of the religion, and one of the reason they can't get married is a parents' disagreement. Parents are not allowing their children to get married to the different caste or different religion, and or one of the reason can be the social pressure. Indian people, they always think what society gonna think, so they are not gonna allow their children to get married to the different religion. And I have a pie chart over here which shows the how much the majority of, let me see this one. Okay, the majority is Hindu in India, so 79.8% is Hindu and 14.2% is Muslim. And one of the reason can be forced to adopt the culture. So I have read one of the articles through my research, and it says the title of the article is Hindu women forced to eat beef adopt Islam's by in-laws in Patna. Patna is the state of India. And it says the woman who is Hindu claimed that her husband, who is Muslim, and his family forcefully made her consume beef and adopt Islam. So I'm Hindu too, and we are not allowed to eat beef because of our religion. Um, we worship cow as our goddess, so we are not allowed to eat the cows. So there are some of the case that girls are forced to eat beef because of she's married to the different religion. And one of the reason can be partner from same country but different caste. So since Sabi mentioned the caste system in Nepal is the same thing in India too. They have the higher caste is Brahmins and the lower caste is Dalit. So if you're married to the the people from higher caste, then your parents will not allow to get married to the lower caste, and you have to hide the relationship with your parents, and you are not allowed to visit family, and you're treated like an outsider. So I have one of the articles which was written by Aditya Sharma in 2020. He talked about one girl who has not a proper conversation with her father for about 3 years now. He just couldn't talk to her. This is the price he has to pay for choosing to marry a lower caste, which is Dalit is considered as an untouchable caste in India. And one of the reasons can be partner abuse and dowry. Dowry is so common in India, and physical abuse, suicide, and murder is so common because of the dowry. And dowry is basically you have to provide cash or any good to the groom family from the bride family. And next slide, I'll be talking about the Aisha Khan's suicide case, which was so viral in India, and there was so protester about it. There's a video, I have the YouTube video, and I'm gonna play this one. She talked Hindi, which is the language in India, but there is a subtitle you can read it through. And in this video, I'm gonna pause just to make sure like you guys understand everything. I'm gonna pause on one point and explain more about it.
हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम है आयशा आरिफ खान और मैं जो भी कुछ करने जा रही हूँ अपनी मर्जी से करना चाहती हूँ। इस पे किसी का दौर या दबाव नहीं है। अब बस क्या कहें, ये समझ लीजिए खुदा की जिंदगी इतनी ही होती है और मुझे इतनी ही जिंदगी बहुत सुकून वाली मिली। और डियर डैड, यार कब तक लड़ेंगे अपनों से? गैस विड्रॉल कर दो। नहीं करना।
Let me get here. Okay, in this slide, it says the Isa father said he has initially paid 1.5 lakhs. 1.5 lakhs is, if you convert it to the US dollar, is 2,500. And in India, it's really hard to make 2,500 to be able to pay the Broom family. Like I have my cousin from India and they only get paid $200 a month. So it's going to be really hard for them to make 2,500 to be able to pay to the Broom family.
कि अहमदाबाद में जो मुसलमान बच्ची का दर्दनाक दिल सोज वीडियो आया है जिसने खुदकुशी कर ली, मैं आप तमाम से अपील कर रहा हूं, चाहे आप कोई भी मजहब के हो, इस जहेज की लानत को खत्म करो।
And next, I'm gonna talk about the partner from different nations. There's lots of peoples I know who got married to the different country, and sometimes you'll be forced to follow the culture if you marry to the different nation. And it's really hard to adopt the different culture, and socially and economically challenging. And I'll talk about the solutions. India, they have to provide some of the educations and they have to send the law enforcement in the rural area. In some part of the India, there is not a police station or anything like that around India, and they have to educate the daughter. Because if the daughter is educated, then if she's on the abuse relationship, she can walk off from that. Like she'll be the independent and she'll make her own money. But Indian people, they don't really think about educate their daughter. They are more into sons, and they have to provide some of the resource so people can work and get money, so they don't have to depend on other people. And this is the conclusion. I talked about the people from same country but different religion, and people from the same country but different caste, and the abuse relations they vary. And those are the photo reference I found the photo from and the information from. That's the conclusion. Thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you very, very much. So next we have our group presenting on sex trafficking and slavery.
I'm Hannah.
I'm Grady.
I'm Toby. And we chose to present over sex trafficking and slavery. So first, I'm just going to start off with what is sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, or transportation for a purpose for the of a commercial sex act. That can happen to both females and males, but usually for different reasons. Females are captivated typically by someone in the sex trafficking industry, while males are lured in after being rejected by a family member or for their sexual preference. And now in both cases, the person that's captivating them usually uses force and false promises. And just like it happens to male and females, it also happens to adults and children. Children account for 21% of people in sex trafficking industry, ages between 14 and 17. Now, what is sexual slavery? The definition of a slave is a person who is held in servitude as the property of another. Sexual slaves are usually captured by false jobs, bribery, kidnapping, or other forms of deceit, and they go unwillingly, which leads to forced slavery. They're often manipulated into sexual slavery, having convinced that their relocation was for legitimate forms of employment, and it's very difficult for them to escape their captors and regain their freedom.
So I'm going to talk about sex trafficking in South Dakota specifically. So until recently, sex trafficking in South Dakota was left unaddressed, and there are very minimal efforts being made to legislate laws and regulations against this. South Dakota is home to 9 Native American reservations and also has 5 of the forest counties in the nation. And because of this, most cases in South Dakota are against Native American women and children. On average, about 40% of women involved in sex trafficking identify as American Indian or Alaska Native. So a study was done in Minnesota, and they interviewed 100 Native American women, and of those interviewed, 79% reported that they've been abused sexually abused by an average of 4 perpetrators. Studies also show that estimated 80% of sex trafficking cases against Native American women are committed by non-Native American men. And according to the Human Trafficking Institute, South Dakota ranks 11th in human trafficking nationwide.
And so, kind of following that, I want to talk about sex trafficking and slavery in the United States. It wasn't labeled a domestic problem until the federal immigration officials released a statement. And in 1999, there was a report that over 50,000 women and children were tempted to come to the United States. They were tempted by their trafficker saying if they come to the United States, they'll have a better life, not only for them, but their family would be taken care of back home. They would make more money coming to the United States, and it was a safer place. Human rights activists and human rights groups raise awareness, which kind of made the U.S. politicians start to realize that this was a problem. And so they kind of forced them to pay attention and start taking action. Also, women, children, and men are sold, traded, forced, and also trafficked. Many of the men are forced into labor, and women and children are usually sexually exploited. And women kind of have it worse because they are forced to prostitute themselves. Either you can have like a kind of like a free leader, or which is a woman that the trafficker has forced them to be to become. They either prostitute themselves or they prostitute other women and children. And many of these victims are immigrants who came to the United States, and they are threatened by their trafficker that if they try to escape, their family would be in danger, and or they would say that U.S. officers would abuse them and deport them. And many of them come from a country where they didn't have a lot, they were kind of poor, they didn't really have like a home to live in with their children. So these traffickers would come and kind of say, oh, you'll get all these nice things, but then once they get here, it's like they're still trapped. And if they try to escape, the trafficker makes it worse for them. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act was passed in 2000. And although this is kind of one step towards a solution, it's still not, we are far from being done to stop the human trafficking in the United
States. What if I turn off the lights?
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Say that. Okay. All right. Today I'm going to be talking about research that I've been working on this semester and it's still in progress. I'm trying to understand changes in how religious people are around the world. And so the title is Religious Decline Confined to the West? An analysis of worldwide decline and average levels of religiosity and variation across generations, 1981 to 2020. Religiosity, by the way, just means how religious people are. Okay, introduction. First of all, there's something called secularization theory that's been around for over 100 years. It says that modernization makes people less religious. Something about getting wealthier, or more educated, or more urbanized, something like that makes people less religious. That's what this theory says. What we do know right now is we know a lot about Western countries, so North America, Western Europe, Australia, and so on. We know that almost all Western countries have gotten less religious over recent decades. That even includes the United States, although the United States is comparatively more religious than most Western countries. So most of these countries have gotten less religious. We also know that this change is generational. In Western countries, each successive generation tends to be less religious than the generation before. So the main thing driving the religious decline in Western countries is generational difference. And I'll be showing you a graph of that, showing that later. By contrast to the Western countries, we know much less about change in how religious people are outside of the West, because most of the research has been on Europe and the United States.
here, let me skip over that one and just say, my central question is, to what extent is Western typical religious decline occurring around the world? Western typical religious decline here, I consider it to have two different elements. One is just on average, how religious people are in the country declines over time. So that would be one element of this religious decline. But in order for it to be sort of secularization in the Western way, the Western countries have been doing it, you also need what I'm calling an intergenerational decline pattern. That's where each successive generation tends to be less religious than the generation before. So at any given time period, you would expect the older generation to be more religious, the younger generation to be less religious. And I'll say, just theoretically speaking, if we have a strong version of secularization theory, and if that is correct, and a strong version of secularization theory is correct, we would expect to see Western typical religious decline probably in most of the world, because the factors that secularization theorists say make people less religious have been happening around the world. Increased education, increased urbanization, increased wealth. All these things have been shifting in vast majority of countries around the world. And so you would expect Western typical religious decline nearly everywhere. Second possibility, some modified, maybe more wishy-washy version of secularization theory is true. For example, some theorists say that modernization is going to cause society to become less religious eventually. We just don't know what's going to tip off the process of society slowly becoming less religious. So that's one theoretical argument that's out there. If that's the case, it's unclear what to expect in terms of countries around the world, if that's true, because again, eventually, like, what does that mean? However, this theory would still be made more plausible if we find evidence that non-Western countries have declined in religiosity and that they increasingly look like Western countries. At least some, if some countries are looking Western typical, then that would make this theory easier to follow. Third possibility, secularization theory is incorrect, as some scholars argue. Some scholars have argued that declines, especially in Europe, in religiosity, are just having to do with like socio-cultural factors that are specific to Europe. And so religious decline is not going to happen elsewhere because it's just a European specific phenomenon. If that's the case, we would not necessarily expect to see Western typical religious decline outside the world. Okay, those are the three possibilities. Data and methods that I'm drawing upon. There's a really great international survey known as the World Values Survey, 1981 through 2020 now. Just the new data just came out, which is really exciting. So it's 40 years of data. I'm analyzing data from 104 countries who have been surveyed over this period, over 500,000 individual surveys. Here's how I measure religiosity, so how religious people are. It's a combination of how it's a scale, and so combining answers to three different survey questions. One about how important God is in your life, one about how often you attend religious services, and one about whether you're a religious person. I'm looking at data. I'll note that I do have more countries from Western Europe and the United States, so more Western countries, and more countries from the former Soviet and Eastern Bloc. However, excitingly, I also have data from all of these world regions. So some regions are better represented, but I also have data from Latin America, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. And what I'm trying to do here is compare, of course, the West with all these other world regions. Methods, I'll just say briefly that I have parts 1 and parts 2. Part 1 looks at how average levels of religiosity, how religious people are, it's changing over time across different world regions. Part 2 is examining the generational pattern. So I come up with the statistics to calculate the average between cohort difference in religiosity between members of different 10-year generations within each country. That's looking at how different generations differ from one another on average. And then I also look at, I use graphs, which I'll show you in a second. There's a whole lot of intricate methodological issues I'm not going to talk about, but so should you choose to do so. Okay, and as I was going through this, I decided it was going to be useful to classify different countries depending on, well, do you have a Western typical generational pattern of successive, each successive generation becoming less religious or not. And so initially I was just gonna say yes, no, but then there are a lot of countries that were in between yes and no. So I ended up coming up with some countries have a robust pattern of generational decline. Some countries have a weak pattern of generational decline, and some countries have no apparent pattern of generational decline. Okay, I'm going to show you some data from a couple countries, a couple Western countries first, so you know what I'm talking about when I'm comparing everything else with. Oh, shoot. No, I'm first going to show you part one, and this is just showing you, okay, this table, you don't have to understand what all of this means, but this is looking at rates of decline in religiosity or rates of increase in religiosity around the world. What this first number means is that on average in the world, there's been very little change, but in the West, there has been statistically significant decline. In Latin America also, there's been statistically significant decline in religiosity. And then in the former Soviet and Eastern Bloc, which was from the USSR, and of course the USSR repressed religion and made it hard to be religious, there's been increase in religiosity. In all of the other regions of the world, there's been change, but it's been of lesser magnitude. Okay, this is the one big graph I'm going to show you on the subject. If you just focus on the world, each little gray dot and line is for a country, but the black is the world average over time from 1980 to 2020. What you can see is, okay, average level of religiosity has been pretty stable at the world level. In the West, though, you can see average level of religiosity in the West has totally declined. Again, average level of religiosity in Latin America has also declined, although to a somewhat lesser degree. Former Soviet and Eastern Bloc, average level of religiosity increased. And you can see, okay, sub-Saharan Africa has been really stable. There's been some movement in Southeast Asia, but okay, you get a mixed change pattern, is what I would say, in terms of average levels of religiosity. Now I'm going to switch to what I was about to start talking about before, which is the difference between different generations, starting with the West. Okay, this is Denmark. This is kind of a typical pattern of each generation becomes less religious. So we have 1980 to 2020, and what it's showing you is average religiosity in different generations. So this little dot here means the generation that was born between 1900 and 1909. Then next we have the generation born between 1910 and 1919, the generation that was born in the 1920s, and so on. And what this shows you is that the oldest generation, the one born in the early 20th century, was the most religious. That's way up here. And then the next generation was less religious than that. The next generation was less religious than that. Here we come to, I guess, people about your age, born, oh my goodness. This is people born in the 1990s are down here. What's really interesting is this shows you that, okay, people in Denmark, once they get to be 18, aren't changing how religious they are very much over time, but nevertheless, the older generations, like we're more religious, each generation gets a little bit less religious than the generation before. That's the Denmark pattern. That's also a pattern you see with some modifications across all Western countries. That's an English example. I think it was nearly 25. The gray pattern here is average level of religiosity for the entire population. And you can see it's declined, and you can also pretty much see that the reason it's declined is because over time, the older, more religious generations have passed away, new, less religious generations have come to the fore. That's why the overall level of religiosity declines in Denmark. Please let me know, by the way, if I'm not making this clear, because I've never explained this to a group of people before. This is the United States. The United States, what's that? Oh, yes. The United States has become less religious. You can see the gray line in the background. You can also see that it has, okay, less clear generational pattern, but still something like the generational pattern I just showed you in Denmark. There's more overlap between generations that's less clear. And in fact, if you look at between generational differences in religiosity, the United States has the smallest differences of all the Western countries. And so there's least generational difference in religiosity in the United States as compared to all Western countries. And the United States is also comparatively more religious than many Western countries, definitely more religious than Denmark. But nevertheless, look at this generation, which is either you or people slightly older than you. They are the least religious. This would be like my great grandmother and her generation. She's right up here. The baby boomer generation is in the red to give you some sense of that. Okay, so that's the United States. That's the Western typical pattern. If we compare what's going on in Western countries with what's going on in the other 7 world regions I examined, when it comes to generational differences, what I'm calling intergenerational decline or an intergenerational decline pattern is more widespread for sure than is just overall religious decline. So religiosity decline. So Latin America is evenly divided between countries like Argentina that have a robust pattern of decline across successive generations and a weak pattern of decline. Brazil is one country with a weak pattern of decline. I'll show you that in a second. You can see that all the Western countries have what I'm categorizing as a robust pattern of decline based on various metrics. The former Soviet and Eastern Bloc, there actually had been some work on Eastern Europe, and a lot of Eastern European countries also have a either robust or weak pattern of intergenerational decline. I was able to study for the first time a lot of countries in Central Asia, which also used to be part of the USSR, as well as the Caucasus, which is like Armenia. And they have no apparent pattern of intergenerational decline. So there seems to be a big divide between the Eastern European countries and the ones in Central Asia and elsewhere that used to be part of the USSR. Sub-Saharan Africa, 2 of the 3 countries have no apparent pattern of intergenerational decline, although South Africa does. But South Africa is kind of an unusual sub-Saharan African country. Middle East, this is a big exclamation mark because Middle East is kind of stereotyped as being a very religious place, but in fact, we see intergenerational decline in most Middle Eastern countries. So we're able to even get data on some countries in addition to these 4, and everyone but Yemen seem to be showing evidence of some intergenerational decline. Although in most cases it's weaker than in the Western countries with less difference between generations. Here's South Asia. Most of those South Asian countries don't have much intergenerational difference. Most of the Southeast Asian countries don't either. Then with East Asia, you get a divide. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan look like Western countries when it comes to generational differences. China and Hong Kong don't at all. How bad am I on time, Yash? Okay, good. I'm trying to go fast here. I'm going to show you just a few charts from select countries, 1 country per world region, just to give you an idea. This is Brazil. And, Brazil has had, one interesting thing that you can see with a country like Brazil is that all the countries went up in religiosity between 1900 and 2000. Then, between 2015 and 2017 or something, all the countries went down in religiosity. Those are known as period effects when for whatever historical reasons, everyone changes in religiosity, it's more or less religious, that's a period effect. But then the cohort effects are, across time, like let's use the green line, which is people born in the 1950s. Across time, people born in the 1950s were always always more religious than the people born in the 1970s, which aren't, for example. So you do that, get that intergenerational difference. And my system categorizes Brazil as weak intergenerational decline for that reason. Middle East and North Africa. This is the one where it was like quite a surprise. Here's Iran, which is a theocracy. If you know anything about the government of Iran, it's run by very conservative religious leaders who are that repressive. And nevertheless, you get a noticeable difference between generations in Iran. There's been Okay, so gray line sort of shows there's been some actual decline in religiosity in Iran, like on average, but it's very marked how big the difference is between generations. With these brown dot is the one born in the 1930s. This cranberry colored dot is the people born in the 1990s. Former Soviet and Eastern Bloc. This is the one where there's like a real mix. So I'm going to show just two examples. The first one being from Romania, which has a weak intergenerational decline. Here's Romania between 1990 and 2020. This is an Eastern European country. You do get differences in religiosity across generations. Generation born in the 1920s, which is always pretty religious. But interestingly, you get a lot of historical period change, and with these generations becoming a lot more religious. And remember, this is right after the fall of the USSR, and so there would have been some removal of religious repression at that time. So you're allowed to be religious. Nevertheless, throughout this time, we do get a pattern where the younger generations, or the newer generations, you could say, were more religious than the older ones. So a weak pattern of generational decline. This is Armenia, which is in the Caucasus region, which is somewhere in between Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And here it's actually completely the reverse. Younger generations, well, the generations aren't that different from one another, but younger generations are more religious than the older generations. And what you can see also is the period effects of how much all the generations changed between like 1990 and the 2000s are more powerful than the intergenerational differences anyway. And so Armenia is a place where there's no apparent, definitely no apparent evidence of intergenerational decline. Sub-Saharan Africa, here we have Nigeria, 1990 to 2020. According to this, is no apparent evidence of intergenerational decline. South Asia, here we have India, same deal, no apparent evidence of intergenerational decline between 1990 and the 2010s. Here we have Vietnam, same deal, no apparent evidence of intergenerational decline over this period. Finally, we have China. I'm showing you China because it's a large country, an important one. The regime there eased up on its restrictions on religion. You get this huge jump. -2 in religiosity means basically no one admits to any religiosity whatsoever in front of those that in trouble with the government. So that was why between the 1990s, then you get a big jump by the 2000s. And you get a decline after that. However, China is never reliably, never had big differences between generations. Okay. What I want to end with here is, I was curious. I mean, the fact that you've got intergeneration, what I'm calling intergenerational decline, as in these differences, successive decreases in religiosity across generations, as measured at any one point in time, is that eventually going to lead more countries to become less religious. This chart, all these different dots show different countries in the world. On the y-axis here, you get the rate of, or you're getting basically how much change there's been over time and overall average religiosity. So let's see, South Korea has become less religious. Montenegro has become more religious up here. And then this axis is average differences in religiosity between separate cohorts. So this is the intergenerational difference thing. Most countries have it so that newer generations, at any given point in time, younger generations are a little less religious. Interestingly, there's a whole set of countries that have gotten, on average, more religious, even though that is also true. The question is whether or not that's going to continue. It's a possibility that the countries up here, for example, Russia, will get less religious in the future because of these intergenerational differences. So that's just a question mark for the future. Social scientists can't know the future. We can just kind of kind of predict the future should current trends continue just as they are now. Then of course up here we have countries where younger generations are actually more religious, and all of these countries have gotten into more religious on average. So that's what this chart is showing us. Not surprisingly, there is a correlation between differences between generations and how the overall country has moved in terms of being more religious or less religious. All these countries, yeah. So the greater the difference between generations, the greater the movement on average in any one direction. Okay, so conclusions. These come in two parts. One, we're talking about overtime change trends. The study finds that average religiosity declined between 1981 and 2020, not just in Western countries, but also, although to a somewhat lesser degree, across Latin America. Trends elsewhere around the world were mixed, with some countries in the former Soviet and Eastern Bloc actually having become more religious, with most countries rather in the former Eastern Soviet Bloc actually having become more religious. Conclusion part two. This is my last slide. The extent of a Western typical intergenerational decline pattern that we'll try to talk about in this one. This study finds that Western typical intergenerational decline is much more widespread than has been previously understood. Not only was robust intergenerational decline found across all Western countries, as expected based on previous studies, but weak or robust intergenerational decline was also present across Latin America and in mostly countries in the Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, except for the former Yugoslavia, and much of East Asia. By contrast, there is little or no intergenerational decline in the Caucasus of Central Asia, China, or in most of the countries of Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. The widespread nature of intergenerational decline suggests the possibility of future, more widespread declines in average levels of religiosity. Results increase the plausibility of the theory that modernization causes religious decline in general. Although many questions remain, certainly religious decline is not nearly as widespread as a strong version of secularization theory would lead us further. All right, thank you.
Questions for any of our presenters? And as with before, or as with earlier, I should say, anyone who's answering a question, if you could come to the front so that those on Zoom can hear and see you. Any questions?
I don't know if you can answer this, but that uptick in 2000, you said it was a period, it was a historical something.
Oh yeah, I put it a period effect.
Period effect. Yeah, but do you know what was happening? Because that's like was pretty consistent across.
That's very observant of you, Cheryl. I think that's right. That it's very interesting, isn't it? I'm trying to remember. So yeah, you see an uptake. This is the United States. You see an uptake in 2000. Where else do you see it?
Before 2001, so it's 2001, but it's before that. Even in the other countries.
Yeah, you see an uptake. Well, yeah, you maybe see an uptake and uptick even in Armenia. Yeah. Yeah, it's not all the countries, but you're right. No, there's a little bit of a pattern of uptick around 2000 and decline between like 2015 and 2020. Globally, a little bit of a pattern.
Yeah.
And that doesn't say modernization theory, because education, for example, education levels or urbanization levels have been increasing across both of those periods. As someone who studies culture and global cultural trends, I'm more inclined to think there might be global cultural trends. For example, attitudes towards homosexuality have become more accepting across all countries locally, which has to do with global cultural discourses. Messages are conveyed in movies and news and all sorts of things like that. So I don't know if I want to put this in the article I'm going to write, because these peer-reviewed articles, you don't want to say anything that you can't defend and fight out. But I have a suspicion that we're talking about global cultural shifts in discourse or something like that. They're affecting not all countries, but a lot of countries. Thanks for that question. That's very observant. If you notice that.
I'm curious about why you chose the countries you chose as defining West. It's interesting to me that you like for you, South America is not in the West, or like Japan historically went through a period that's called like its westernization, but for you that's like Southeast Asia. So I'm just curious that like why you chose like how you chose which countries are Western and then like why and stuff like that.
Well, so I didn't have time to get into that, but I'm not the one who chose them. I'm using a system. It's based on a bunch of area experts were consulted, and they argued that, okay, they tried to both respect geographical closeness, but also institutional similarity, for example, systems of governance, things like that. And it was on that basis that these were discussed. I mean, there's a whole body of literature that talk about there being regional cultural differences. Now, you have to be careful with that, but and some Latin American intellectual types say, actually, Latin America is much like the West. You could consider it to be part of the West. No one would say that about Japan, though. Like East Asia is thought of as being influenced by Confucian traditions, things like that. Although Westernization, yes, you can make an argument that there's Westernization. That's right.
I actually had a question for somebody. So I was curious to what extent, and I don't want to put you in the term at all, so I'm not going to attempt it. To what extent has this tradition continued in terms of how widespread it is? Has it remained about the same? Has it increased in terms of adherence to it, or has it declined at all?
I would say that this tradition, though it has not, it is steadily practiced throughout those regions, but I think it has a widespread implication all throughout the country, because even we were subjected to parts of the tradition, as it were. And even if I was to go back home and I would stay there, and if I had my kids going on, then I would not be allowed in the kitchen. I would not be allowed in the room where my brother or my father is. And even during my first cycle, I think it is a variation of it, because I was not expected to live outside, but they just like separated an entire room for me that had bathroom inside of it, and I was given my own set of dishes to have dinner in, and I could not give it out. I had to wash it by myself. So I think, yeah, like it isn't as controlled, like it isn't as low as we would want it to be, but at the same time, it has evolved into something that can be easily practiced all throughout the country. That is how it is.
Okay, so the practice it's still very widespread. That there's the most extreme variant of it, and that's declined.
Yes.
Is that there's been a change, modification needs to make it more livable situation. Other questions? Those of you on Zoom, if you have any questions, certainly don't be shy.
I'm not shy.
Perfect.
Quick question. I was kind of virtually proctoring an exam during that. So Louisa, it was really fun to hear you research things. I usually just get to watch you research at the Beam. So that was cool. But could you just briefly explain what that religiosity measure is? Like,
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. Thanks for watching the presentation.
yeah, thank you.
And the religiosity measure is it's a combination of people's answers, and here I think it's often averaged at the national level what their answers were on 3 survey questions. So people were asked, like, how important is God in your life? Are you a religious person? And how frequently do you attend religious services? So it's combined across all those 3. In some cases, there's slightly different patterns across those 3 survey questions, and I didn't have time to talk about that, but
no.
Yes.
That's interesting. I also thought the Eastern, I think it was the Eastern Bloc had like the uptrend or uptick. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's super interesting. Is there like a reason for that you?
So yeah, there totally. I mean, I think the most obvious reason, and I'm sure this is the number one reason, is the USSR fell and the associated communist system, which included like a repression of religion, like religion was literally illegal, and to varying degrees in these different countries. So it became legal again. And so, so that's number one reason right there.
Yeah, well, that would make you more likely to probably answer a survey question like that, honestly, at least.
That's also true, right?
Okay,
Exactly.
thank you.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Good question.
Okay, well, looks like we're generally out of time, but I really appreciated everyone who came out to present and share their research with us this year. We'll be doing this again round and about, it's not a formally set date, but round about April 29th of next year. So please do feel free to keep us in mind. Also, if you're interested in continuing your research, please reach out for students to your faculty. We're here to help you. We have resources that you can use to assist you in, whatever research you're interested in. And, if I can't help you or the other faculty presented today can't help you, we probably know someone that is doing similar research that might have knowledge that might be able to help you. So please do feel free to utilize us as resources. Don't feel like today has to be your stop to your research journey, though it can be. It's okay. I'm not going to push you into it. So anyway, thanks for coming out, and please feel free to join us for the social. And thank you to everyone on Zoom as well. It was really phenomenal to have you all here with us.
Thank you, Yash. Yes, thank you, Yash.
All right.